The world watched in horror as another devastating tragedy unfolded in Gaza. But this one carries a disturbing twist that has journalists and medical professionals questioning everything they thought they knew about warfare ethics. Just 1 hour ago, reports emerged of a calculated double assault on Nasser Hospital in Gaza that claimed the lives of 20 individuals, including 5 international journalists and multiple healthcare workers. But here's where it gets controversial. This wasn't a single tragic mistake. It was later that same Monday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu attempted damage control by labeling the incident a tragic mishap that Israel deeply regrets, promising a thorough military investigation. And this is the part most people miss. How can a precisely timed second strike on the exact same location be called an accidental mishap? Breaking down the timeline. How this calculated attack unfolded, the sequence of events reads like a deliberate military strategy rather than random violence. The initial strike occurred around 10:30 local time, immediately creating what one British medical professional described as mass panic and absolute chaos throughout the hospital corridors. This British healthcare worker, who was actively treating patients in the intensive care unit when hell broke loose, witnessed the terror firsthand. Picture this, medical staff scrambling to save lives when suddenly their world explodes around them. But here's the truly chilling part. Approximately 10 minutes later, just as emergency responders, journalists, and medical personnel gathered at the scene to help victims of the first attack, a second blast struck the identical location. The British medical professional revealed that hospital staff were actually planning their escape route when the second strike deliberately targeted them. The systematic nature of this attack becomes even more apparent when you consider what was hit. The hospital's emergency department, inpatient ward, surgical unit, and even the emergency staircase, essentially crippling the facility's ability to function as a medical center. BBC Verify has authenticated video footage that confirms these precise timings, removing any doubt about the deliberate nature of this double strike strategy. Visual evidence that cannot be ignored. Multiple video sources paint a horrifying picture of calculated violence. Al Ghad TV's live stream captures several emergency workers responding to the initial strike near Nasser Hospital's upper floors, while numerous journalists document the unfolding tragedy from the background. The footage shows journalists gathering on their usual broadcasting staircase when the second strike directly targets these emergency workers and reporters, sending deadly smoke and debris flying through the air. At least one body becomes visible in the immediate aftermath, a stark reminder of the human cost of this tactical decision. Additional video evidence, filmed from that same staircase, reveals the devastating aftermath, with bodies scattered across the steps as medics desperately attempt to respond to the carnage. Another clip, recorded at the hospital's main entrance, shows a medical worker displaying bloodied clothing to the camera, before yet another explosion forces everyone to run for their lives. The British medical professional's testimony adds another layer to this horror story, describing trails of blood covering every surface and absolute scenes of chaos, disbelief, and paralyzing fear throughout the facility. Remembering the human lives behind the headlines, while we know the identities of the murdered journalists, the other victims remain largely anonymous, a tragic reminder of how quickly human lives become statistics in conflict reporting. The Hamas-controlled health ministry confirmed that both rescuers and patients were among those killed, but their stories may never be fully told. Hussam al-Masri, who worked as a Reuters cameraman, died during the initial strike while operating a live television feed. His footage had been used by news organizations worldwide, including the BBC, making his loss particularly significant for global journalism. Think about that for a moment. He was literally broadcasting to the world when he was killed. Mariam Daga, just 33 years old, represented one of the few brave women journalists covering this devastating conflict. Working as a freelancer for the Associated Press, she regularly reported from this very hospital. Her story becomes even more heartbreaking when you learn about her 13-year-old son, who had been evacuated from Gaza earlier in the war to live safely with his father in the United Arab Emirates. She stayed behind to tell the world's story, paying the ultimate price. Mohammed Salama's story reads like a tragic love letter to hope crushed by war. Working for both Al Jazeera and Middle East Eye, he was planning his wedding to fellow journalist Hala Asfour. The couple had been dreaming of their ceremony, hoping to celebrate after a ceasefire that may never come. Ahmed Abu Aziz, only 28, carried dreams of studying abroad while working as a freelancer for Middle East Eye in Khan Yunis. Originally engaged before the war began, he married his fiancée, lawyer Lucy Saleh, last summer, perhaps sensing that time was running short. His recent words haunt us. He spoke about avoiding having children simply because I don't have the strength to guarantee them a life. But here's what really gets to you. Abu Aziz had stopped making casual conversation with fellow journalists because, as he put it, I can't bear the thought of losing another friend. He understood the dangerous game they were all playing, yet continued reporting anyway. Moaz Abu Taha worked with various outlets, including even the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, just 2 weeks prior, filming a video call that showed children suffering from severe malnutrition at this very same Nasser Hospital. Reuters occasionally published his work, making his death a loss for multiple international news organizations. The bigger picture: why international journalists can't enter Gaza. Here's something many people don't realize. Israel actively prevents international news organizations, including major outlets like the BBC, from entering Gaza to report freely. This policy forces global media to rely entirely on local Palestinian reporters who risk their lives daily to bring us the truth. The Committee to Protect Journalists reports a staggering statistic that should shock everyone. More than 190 journalists have been killed during just 22 months of this conflict, with the overwhelming majority being Palestinians killed in Israeli attacks. Let that sink in. We're talking about nearly 200 media professionals who died trying to inform the world. Just 2 weeks before this hospital attack, Israel killed 6 journalists in what sources describe as a targeted assault near Shifa Hospital in Gaza City. The pattern is becoming impossible to ignore, and the international outcry continues to grow. Israel's response: damage control or genuine remorse? The Israel Defense Forces initially confirmed conducting the strike near Nasser Hospital, but their subsequent statements throughout the day revealed something telling: an apparent lack of clarity within their own military about the attack, despite multiple carefully worded press releases designed to address the mounting global outrage. By Monday evening, Netanyahu's office released a statement claiming Israel deeply regrets the tragic mishap that occurred today at the Nasser Hospital in Gaza. They emphasized that Israel values the work of journalists, medical staff, and all civilians, while announcing a thorough investigation. But here's the critical question that exposes the weakness in their narrative. How does this official statement address the clearly intentional double-tap nature of the attack? When most victims die in a precisely timed second strike at the exact same location, approximately 10 minutes later, calling it a mishap seems disingenuous at best, Double-tap attacks represent a highly controversial military tactic deliberately designed to maximize casualties by targeting those who respond to help after an initial strike. This isn't accidental collateral damage. It's a calculated strategy that violates international humanitarian principles. Media organizations, including the Foreign Press Association operating in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories, have directly accused the Israeli military of systematically and intentionally targeting journalists throughout the international outrage. The world responds. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres delivered a scathing condemnation of these horrific killings at Nasser Hospital, emphasizing how they highlight the extreme risks that medical personnel and journalists face as they carry out their vital work amid this brutal conflict. He demanded a prompt and impartial investigation. But will anyone actually deliver justice? UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy expressed being horrified and called for an immediate ceasefire, while French President Emmanuel Macron labeled the strikes intolerable, insisting that civilians and journalists must receive protection. He renewed urgent calls for humanitarian aid access to Gaza and demanded that Israel respect international law. Germany's Foreign Office said they were shocked, while U.S. President Donald Trump claimed ignorance of the strikes initially. But when pressed for his reaction, the lukewarm American response compared to European outrage raises uncomfortable questions about international priorities. Media freedom organizations didn't mince words in their condemnation. Thibault Brutin, head of Reporters Without Borders, asked the question everyone's thinking: when and where is it going to end? There is international law. There are guarantees that should be granted to journalists covering conflicts, and none of that seems to be applying. The Committee to Protect Journalists delivered perhaps the most damning assessment. Israel's broadcasted killing of journalists in Gaza continues while the world watches and fails to act firmly. The Foreign Press Association called these latest killings a necessary watershed moment, urging international leaders to finally take meaningful action. They directly challenged Israel to halt its abhorrent practice of targeting journalists, adding that too many journalists have been killed by Israel without justification. The uncomfortable questions we must ask. This brings us to the heart of a deeply controversial debate. Are we witnessing systematic targeting of journalists and medical personnel, or are these truly tragic accidents of war? The evidence seems to point in a troubling direction, but the international community appears paralyzed to act decisively. How many more journalists must die before the world moves beyond strongly worded statements to actual consequences? When does expressing concern become complicity through inaction? And here's perhaps the most uncomfortable question of all. If these attacks are indeed systematic and intentional, what does that say about the international community's commitment to press freedom and the protection of medical facilities during conflicts? The pattern is undeniable, the evidence mounting, and the silence of many world leaders speaks volumes. But what do you think? Are we looking at calculated targeting or tragic coincidences? Should the international community impose real consequences or continue with diplomatic protests? The journalists who died at Nasser Hospital can no longer speak for themselves, so the question becomes, will you speak for them? What price are we willing to pay for truth in conflict zones? And who should bear the responsibility for protecting those who risk everything to inform the world? These aren't just statistics or headlines. They're human beings who chose to stay in harm's way so the rest of us could understand what's happening. They deserved better than to become casualties in what appears to be a calculated campaign against press freedom. What's your take on this tragedy? Do you believe the official explanations, or do you see something more sinister at work? The comment section awaits your thoughts, because this conversation is far from over.